Hey, TheEZGZ here. Thought I'd continue on with chapter 2 of my sand series and go into a little bit greater detail on how to make an engine live out in the sand. Some of the things that we used to do. This engine is a 1776. It was the original engine that came in my sand rail, my sand car, and it was a full-bodied vehicle when I first got it, and we stripped it down because I wanted to resell that car, but I had some issues with it right off the bat. It was too heavy to function properly on the sand, and I did not know anything about that car. I had not built it. I saw it. It was street legal, and I didn't have a place. I was living in a townhouse with no garage and no inside parking, and that seemed to fill the bill for me. But I found out once I got it to the sand dunes, I could hardly get around. It was pretty pathetic. And I was going to start this engine up for you, but when I got to looking at it a little bit closer, this is the distributor drive gear, and I had tried to take it out, and then I was turning the crankshaft looking at something different, and I saw all this brass in here. And I thought, yeah, this is not good. I've damaged the brass distributor drive gear, and I just let the dang thing set. I had another project going on, but I'd forgotten about that, and it's a good thing that I checked it out before I tried firing it up, because that could have gotten around. And as far as I know, this is still a good engine. That distributor drive gear goes down this hole to the heart of the engine, and it's driven by the crankshaft gear, and we'll be looking at that at a later date, I'm sure. So what do you have to keep an engine alive on the sand dunes? Now, you've seen this pulley before in an earlier video, but I'll just hold it up here again. You got to have a pulley to drive the fan belt, which goes to the generator or alternator, which is mounted in this stand, and on the back of that is a cooling fan that blows air across the cylinders and heads of the engine. So on this sand seal pulley, normally there's a threaded section here to keep some of the oil vapors and things inside the crankcase, but here it's smooth, and you've got, this is not a machine-in seal, this is the tap-in style, and you put a little sealer on the back of it, tap it into the case. It's a friction fit, and it stays there. And that's how you keep sand from getting in on this end of the engine, because we're out there in the sand dunes with these things hanging in the back, and there's always situations where you might get sand in. Now, aside from the sand, you need to filter your oil in case you do somehow get some sand in there. It would get into your pump, but you don't want to get into your bearings. It's a lot cheaper to replace an oil pump than it is bearings on your car and having to split the engine completely. What I did on this one, this is a 26mm pump, and you've got these gears that go in there. These are the pump drive gears. They just sit inside, and as the oil goes through here, you got another gear like this right underneath it, and because these gears are connected on the end of the camshaft, this one right here, it rotates around, and as it squeezes the oil through and goes out the discharge side of the pump, it's drawn in on the suction side of the pump, which is right here. Now, the normal discharge would be through this, but it's not being filtered except for that little screen that you normally find in a stock engine. We take that out and we plug the outlet of the oil pump, and then we'll put a cover over the oil pump. This is not one that I use. This is a brand new one that I just had in stock. And this becomes the outlet now, and the oil is forced through a hose of some type, a high pressure hose. You don't ever want to use anything like heater hose. You want to use special hose. And you run it through the hose, and then you'll run that over to an external cartridge type oil filter, and hopefully get some good filtration. Even though some of these filters, depending on the style you get, can have a bypass spring, and there's all sorts of things on filters, you know about that sort of stuff. So you run through an external oil filter, maybe a cooler, an external extra cooler or something like that. Then you come back to the engine and you'll hear us talk about full flowing the case. This is an area that normally has a plug from the factory. You remove that plug. I've made a video on that. You thread the case, and then this becomes the feed line for your oil that's already been filtered. Then what else do we do here? Okay, every engine, no matter what kind it is, creates some sort of crankcase vapors because you get a little blow by the piston rings, and they on a modern engine with emissions, they keep it contained and it just goes through the intake and is reburned and goes out the exhaust after all that. So on these old engines, you didn't do that, but you have to provide a means for these crankcases to breathe. And some guys would run a little filter set up like this. This would normally be the generator stand, and it's where you add oil to your engine, and you'd seal it up with a cap. Then you'd put some sort of a filter device like this. These don't work very good. They'll last a few hours if you're driving hard in the sand and you're going around the sand dunes at odd angles all the time. These things will just get saturated with oil and it'll be dripping out by the end of the day, and you're going to have sand sticking to that oily mess, and it just makes a mess, gets every place. So the oil light would often come on our cars because we were going at odd angles for extended periods of time, and we used to run, at least I did, there's one other guy that I know of that was pretty religious about it. We'd run this extra 1.5 sump of oil so that all the oil would accumulate there, and hopefully you weren't driving at the odd angles long enough. When you did see your oil light come on, you either pushed in the clutch and shut it down, got on level ground, or headed for downhill to level ground. This is what we would put on the bottom of the engine where your oil drain is, the little sump that goes on the bottom, and this little red anodized aluminum fitting would sit in that custom plate, and there was 2 legs so that it didn't fall down, but it has a couple O-rings in there. It's kind of cute. It fits inside the engine, and I figured that way I'd be slurping oil right off the very bottom at every opportunity, and maximizing the length of time that I could go at the odd angles. So what's next? That still didn't allow for enough breathing. We used to have our valve covers, we would put these fittings in our valve covers, just a little tube there, and we would run some low pressure hose similar to this, and we would come to another device that would be, this is the one I used, I like these a lot. I would mount this on my frame up high, and I'd have the 2 hoses for my valve covers, and then a third one for this fitting here. I'd run hoses, so you got a maze of hoses going all over the place. What else have we got here? We ran these cotton K&N style oiled filters, and these things would just get plugged up with sand and dirt would stick to them. It was pretty bad in an outside off-road environment. So what we used to do is we would run these outerwears polyester filters that stretches over your air cleaner to keep that clean, and some of us actually would get these special Philstar foam filters. This is not the correct kind of foam, but we'd wrap this around that polyester filter and kind of like triple filter it. The problem with doing some of that triple filtering is it kills your high RPM because your engine can't breathe and it'll go real rich. So it can alter your jetting and it can create its own issues, but it's critical if you want these engines to live to keep the sand out. A lot of guys run these other style of oil filters where the filter is just attached to the side of the pump, and you eliminate all those hoses going out, and then it would just hang off the side of the motor right here. We used to run windage tubes for our pushrod tubes. I'd taken a piece of an old pushrod tube and I cut it into these small pieces, and I put those inside the bottom, the case side of these where the pushrod tube goes, and that would extend the pushrod tube like you see here, and that would prevent oil when you're on an odd angle from draining into the valve cover, because the downhill side valve cover would usually fill up with oil if you were driving at an angle along the bottom of a sand dune, which we frequently did. We used to call that side hilling, and it was just incredible, the sensations that you would feel, and just running these engines so hard and so strong. The last time I built this engine, I put a counterweighted crankshaft in it. It was fourth over. When I bought this thing, I found out that it was a grenade. No shims had been put underneath the cylinders. The guy didn't tell me about that. It was way high compression, and I was only running pump gas. I should have probably been running some sort of a racing fuel, and I wouldn't have bought it because I couldn't afford that. And it did, because of detonation, I started having problems. The cylinder head started leaking, and the engine started smoking within just a few thousand miles. So I replaced the cylinders and pistons and lowered the compression with a 40,000 shim. They look like similar to this. They go underneath the cylinders, and you can calculate and adjust your compression that way. This is a sweet little motor. Had a lot of Geenberg parts in it, and I'm doing a new build right now. I just want something mild with a little bit of extra horsepower, because at the altitude that I live at, 5,000 feet and above, you just normally lose horsepower at these altitudes, maybe 20 to 30%, and you definitely feel it in the seat of the pants motor. So when you build a performance motor like this, my idea was sort of to get a little extra horsepower to compensate for the loss in the altitude. The other thing is the power to weight ratio. When I first built this engine, and this has a Geenberg 295 cam, a lot of Geenberg components are in this engine, and we'll look closer into detail in another video, but I wanted to cover right now in this video how to sand seal the engine so that your engine will live and survive on the sand dunes. I hope you enjoyed chapter 2. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subbing. TheEZGZ out.